Okay, Carl.
And it says you're live. All right,
Live.
all right, I gotta get off the phone. Okay, guys. What a time to be alive, right? Carl, where are you? What are you showing? What are you showing us? Hang on.
You're on mute.
Oh.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Are you with us now, Carl?
Yes, I am.
Okay, guys. All right. So, Carl Joshua, how you doing, mate? You're right. Let me officially just start this program. Great to have you on the show, Carl.
Cool, fantastic. Great to be here.
The exciting bit now when you're talking about the Nando's opening. So they called me about 2 weeks ago, and they said, "Hey, we'd like you to go open in Victoria Falls." And I'm like, guys, that's like 3 days of my life, you know. I am quite sure because I would need to travel, come back, and so on. I'm quite. Carl Joshua is in town, you know what I mean? And then I saw you took that gig.
Oh,
I was very happy you took that gig.
Dude, I'm going to put you down as a sponsor for Ekaya, because you literally, basically what you did is that you just built a rural community by referring your favorite comedian in the world.
If I say I referred, I would be lying. But I mean,
yeah.
I said to Sandy, I saw you took Carl Joshua. I think that was absolutely a no-brainer, actually. You know what I mean? It was absolutely a no-brainer. No point in somebody was coming into Vic Falls. So great stuff. And Shirley, congratulations on the baby. Allow me to say that.
Thank you very much. It's quite a blessing in these uncertain times of ours to have a little one come into the world. So chuffed.
Absolutely. So guys, our conversation really is going to be just unorthodox. We're going to be talking about us to tourism and conservation. If the funny bit for me with talking about tourism and conservation is that in the last 2-3 months, I've been on a warpath with whoever owns Victoria Falls, and I've been telling the guys, come on, $7 to get into the Vic Falls. Does this work? And I had a big fight on social media about it, and I was saying, look, the little kid who lives in Chinotimba or Kosana never gets to watch the falls, but can only hear the thunder. You know, your pricing model has always been for international tourists, and our little kids get to hear the story of the Victoria Falls from kids that come from London and Europe. You know, so I'm glad that you guys are here. The one guy from Zim Parks, whose name I shall not say, then says, no, we are not funded by government. We have to pay for salaries and so on. And I'm like, why don't you just go cheap and work on masses, you know, fill up the place, at least the people of Zimbabwe, because now the pandemic reminded you that we are here. Zimbabweans are here and they can, you know. So guys, look, Really, I know that you're passionate about tourism and conservation, and so is Carl Joshua. Carl, we're going to talk about your project, Ekaya, and how you literally have a vision of transforming the landscape. I mean, it has been said before, the future is rural, but the Srei queens in the cities think that the future is in Samosha. You know, so Shirley, I'll start off with you. Do you think that government is really doing enough in terms of promoting tourism and making it accessible for local Zimbabweans?
Look, I think there's been massive steps forward, particularly this year. I think, like you say, this pandemic has shown us that we need to focus a little bit more on our local base. I think the government has taken some pretty good steps to support the sector. They've removed the local VAT that was the subsidy owed from properties. to try and help them to reduce their pricing. It's the one thing I want, when you were talking about the national parks issue and the pricing. So this is a debate I've had in my own internal family as well. My dad primarily is, I agree that we need to, I think it needs to be a balance between international tourism and local tourism. And if we have the numbers from an international perspective, then we can reduce the numbers, the actual cost to the locals. For me, one thing people forget is that these areas and protecting these areas and maintaining these areas as wildlife landscapes and tourist destinations comes at a cost. And so I can understand what the national parks guy said in terms of, you know, in order to protect these areas and maintain them as protected areas, there is a certain level of cost that comes at that. And they have to look at where and how they generate that revenue. So it has to be a very, very much a balanced thing where we're not, I think historically we potentially have focused too much on the international market and not given much, not that we've focused too much on the international market, but we haven't given enough thought to how we engage with the local markets and how we get the buy-in from our local community to actually, I mean, I have had the privilege to be able to visit the national parks growing up, and that is where my passion has stemmed from. And I think what Carl and I were talking about earlier is that, like you were saying, someone who lives in Chinatimber doesn't have access to go and see the Victoria Falls. If from a younger age people had access to go and visit some of our protected areas, then they would naturally have this intrinsic built-in pride in their heritage and want to protect it. So we definitely need to look at solutions of how we can make it more accessible to the local market, not only in terms of people being able to visit these destinations, but in terms of having some growth in the national pride for our local heritage. And our heritage is, if you look at anyone in the world, we are blessed as a nation in terms of what we have right here on our doorstep in Zimbabwe. And we need to really focus on protecting that for the long-term preservation, not only for ourselves, for our kids. The revenue streams that can come from protecting these wild landscapes, especially now post-COVID, I think is huge. So it's looking at solutions. The challenge is, how do you find that solution? Because part of our challenges in Zimbabwe is that the actual earning capacity is very low. So most people are not earning salaries that would allow them to go and spend it on visiting Victoria Falls or a national park. People are living hand to mouth, so to speak, day to day. I don't think there's a huge amount of excess financial cash available or financial spending available to locals in this country simply because of our economic situation.
Yeah, I hear you, Shelley. And my question then again, the balance is there definitely to pay and to, I mean, conservation is expensive. We appreciate that. But also, do you not think that if we lower the price, we'll get more people and attract more people to actually enter, and you probably break even in terms of, and you market it with, you really pretty much go on a Chinese model, where it's cheaper and more people get to visit, and even the aesthetics and the marketing of people visiting the falls, as opposed to having 10 people visit, and they pretty much own the whole falls, all 10 of them. So it's really a balance. I absolutely agree with you. But it would be great if we can, in our local, in our Zimbo, or in our promoting local tourism, that we make local tourism accessible, at least to the civil servant. How do we make a civil servant get to visit these tourist attractions? How you want to come in there?
Yeah. So I just come in the space, I think, more from a disruption perspective. and just looking at alternatives. And I think all of the arguments are quite valid. The issue now is to not so much look at who is right, but to do what's right. The country is struggling right now in terms of perception management or getting the country to be unified. I think there's an opportunity that we're missing here where if you look at South Africa and how they use the Rainbow Nation, and a lot of adverts were incentivized to push that agenda of the Rainbow Nation. Now, let's look at Zimbabwe from a behavioral perspective. I don't see a reason why the city council, by the way, we're a city now, why the city council doesn't look at things like, if you pay your bills on time or early, then you get credits to a discount to the falls, or even that they take up that bill from a marketing perspective. Or corporates can put on their products a token system of collecting a number of tokens in order to get your 50% off or to get to the falls for free. Encouraging good behavior, the payment of licensed discs. There's so many different organizations from a government revenue perspective. If your business is registered on time, your tax clearances are done, there should be incentives. From a school's perspective, kids that have good grades, the schools can actually take on that cost. I can see on a larger scale, more people being able to get access to the falls, parks getting the money that they require, people getting to see the falls without having to pay. But we've just taken a different way of looking at it from a consumer's perspective to say 10 loaves of bread gives you access to Victoria Falls because Bakers Inn can pay that cost to national parks based on the level that they're going to make money from a promotion. So I think rather than us shouting at each other on who's right or wrong about this issue, perhaps maybe we need to look outside of the normal model of charging the $7. Let's keep it there, but let's try to encourage the fact that perhaps there's different marketing ways of encouraging good behavior in our country at a time where we do need to have people behaving a certain way, and actually throw weight behind those kind of campaigns to get people access to the falls. So one other thing is encouraging ownership. So we are more about empowering the local community, because the countries I've traveled to, I only love those countries because the locals do the things that they've shown me. So if you've got more people in Victoria Falls that aren't seeing the falls, then you have this weird disconnect, because the tourists come and then they see locals that don't see the falls. Sooner or later, this whole issue is going to break internationally, and it will look worse than the Vic Falls is dry issue to us, to the international community, to say locals can't afford the falls. I think the onus is on us to lobby and figure out ways of encouraging good behavior, leveraging the corporates, leveraging the government departments, leveraging the NGOs to somehow create a pool, almost like a lottery. There's so many tourist attractions that have a lottery system where, say, 5,000 people are granted free access to the falls every year. Surely we can do this, and we can encourage a certain type of behavior. So I would encourage we look at other means besides the straight $7.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Well, you both touched on well, pretty much what would be my next question is, Shelley, what I know that government scrapped the VAT on for tourist companies, but what are the challenges do you think that tourist companies go through in terms of service delivery in Zimbabwe?
It's a great question, actually, and this comes into the fact that a lot of people, when they talk about Zimbabwe, they talk about pricing and how it's quite high pricing. We are privileged that most of our tourism destinations are fairly remote. Sorry, my power just went for a second. Am I still connected?
Yes, you are.
Yep.
Majority of our major tourism destinations and national parks in this country are fairly remote. So a lot of the operators that we are looking at operate in remote areas where there is no natural power, no actual data. So they are all off the grid as solar. Majority of them are I'm excluding Vic Falls from the equation in this. They're operating off either diesel-generated power, solar power. A lot of them are sourcing their groceries from Harare, sourcing some of their products externally from South Africa. the logistics of getting supplies into these camps to be able to provide world-class standards is heavy. You know, having to have fuel on site so that they've got fuel in all their game drive vehicles, the training for their chefs, it's extensive, the amount of things that the local operators do that goes unseen. And majority of our local operators are very conservation focused. In fact, there are very few that I would say are not conservation focused. And so they are not just about the revenue generation. There's a huge amount that is going back into the local communities that surround these national parks, assisting with education, assisting with teachers' salaries, looking at empowerment skills, like Carl was talking about, providing empowerment as opposed to a handout mentality, and empowering the people. They are assisting national parks with logistics in terms of anti-poaching efforts. So from a logistics perspective, because a lot of the operators are in these remote areas, there's quite a lot of cost that comes to get things into the camps to provide the service levels that people would expect from an international perspective. But there's also a lot that goes back into those areas, protecting them, helping and assisting to empower the local communities, etc. And I think that is something that we as Zimbabwe are lucky with, is there is a lot of giving back from our operators that takes place in this country.
Well, thank you, Shelley. Shelley, you are obviously passionate about conservation, and from your take, and you've already mentioned that most operators are very passionate about conserving conservation and making sure that we protect our tourist attractions, to protect our environment for our future generation, for our kids, and so on. Now, how do we inculcate the same mentality into the communities around these places, so that they also have the same mentality? For example, that you need to take care of your trees and take care of your animals. You know, I know that campfire projects are there, but how else can we get to our people in our communities in the rural areas to teach them about conservation, to deliberately teach them about conservation?
So it's a great question, and to say that the local communities living around these wild areas are the custodians is an understatement. Technically, these wildlife areas belong to the entire population, those communities in particular. And I think how we get them on board is to make sure that they are benefiting from the tourism sector. If you look at Gonorrhoea down the south of Zimbabwe, it has been a fantastic model in terms of how they have engaged the local community. They have employed within those local communities around Gonorrhoea National Park. They have put a lot into the educational facilities for those families in those communities. And so it's starting from the bottom level, where you've got children who are being educated about the conservation, the heritage, etc. But then you are also having these local communities who are earning from tourism. They are engaged in the tourism. They see the value of protecting this landscape because they are directly benefiting from it. And I think that is key for us to have a greater, wider spread engagement from local communities in our country.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm gonna pose the same question to you, Carl. I mean, vis-a-vis your EKAYA project. I mean, you've quite recently started interacting with locals in a very rural setup. Maybe let's look at a very traditional sense, you know, because I don't believe that the fact that people within the rural setup they've always lived around animals, and we've always had a concept that you should take care of your cow, to take care of your dog, because it takes you for hunting. There were always rules around even our forests, you know. But of course, urbanization and so on has totally messed this up. Where did we get it wrong, and how do we get back to a traditional sense of taking care of our forests and our wild animals.
Yeah, so I'm glad you used the word traditional, and that this is the key. We have to decode the messaging. You see, the thing is, for as long as we keep teaching people about conservation without acknowledging that historically we were already conservationists, this is where
Yeah.
we sort of miss the point. The issue here is that this is the reason why we've got totems, was that we were custodians of animals. Like, I wasn't allowed to kill an animal that was my totem or eat it. And that preserved and conserved animals. Yeah, I couldn't even eat an animal that's your totem out of respect for your totem. And those totems were not
Yeah.
livestock and domesticated. We're talking actual elephants, lions, cheetahs, leopards, all of those animals. There was an entire catalog that was already there. And the issue is that in our education, we need to take it from, because I did a documentary going around the country. One thing that I noticed was that we talk about off-grid, conservation, sustainability. These are not words in our culture, because in our culture, conservation is spiritual. So once you take away and you say, oh no, you shouldn't pray to your ancestors and you shouldn't do any of these things, then you're cutting out a significant amount of the conservation messaging that is absolutely necessary. Those festivals, the brewing of the beer, and all of the things that were happening in those communities, the minute you took those out, because traveling around the world, I've heard these words. I've heard about tiny homes. Tiny homes in Zimbabwe, we already live in tiny homes. We already live off grid. We already are growing our own food. We're already eating superfoods. But look at the history of Zimbabwe. They took away our superfoods. They gave us maize. They took us out of our land, where, remember, we were nomads. So we were allowing the land to heal, moving from place to place. And they started putting us in reserves. So they put us in one place. It's like everything that happened to our people actually stripped us of our conservation, our abilities to conserve, and brought us into this new space of doing things the wrong way. And so now we're coming back. It's almost weird, because when you look at food, one typical example was when bread was made. What they did is they started removing the husks, because they said it made the bread too tough, but they removed all the vitamins from the bread. And so they made the bread white and pure, and now they have to put in vitamins, which is weird, because now they're putting synthetic vitamins back into the bread. And so in this messaging with conservation, we have to relearn where we were and merge it with the new knowledge and find a way of decoding that knowledge. So rather than just say, stop killing the animals, because remember, poaching is only, the demand for poaching is a Western and Eastern thing. It's not a Zimbabwean thing. If someone kills an animal because there's someone in a market in some country who's willing to pay top dollar for it, that's why there's a demand. It's not us. We have no need for ivory. There's no place where ivory is used in that context. If you go the Sabukus right now, they you couldn't kill anything without a chief. So all I'm saying is that we just need to go back. This is why even our company is called Ekaya, because it's a return. It's a return, Kumusha. It's going back to how we used to think and come up with this new knowledge, but in our language, so that we can understand a way forward.
Okay, thanks very much, Carl. And now that you've said that and you've got the platform, Carl, do you want to share with everybody watching right now your vision, your Ekaya? What's Ekaya all about? What are you trying to achieve? And so far, what would you list as your positives? You know, what's giving you goosebumps about
Right.
Ekaya? You know, when you get up and you think about it, about how huge it's going to be, what keeps you awake about it?
Right. So what keeps me awake is that living in Victoria Falls, for one, it just opens your eyes. You know, when you see a truck bringing vegetables from another city into Victoria Falls, and you know there's rural communities in between that could have grown this food, it changes you. When you see a rural community sitting there and getting food aid for COVID, when you know just down the road there were tourists that wanted to stay in
your hut and willing to pay the money for it. When you know that when you travel around the world and everywhere, when I've done a TED talk, for example, when people say, I want to come and stay in a rural home, but I just don't know how. I don't want to offend the people. I just don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to pay the money. If someone could just come up with a way, like an Airbnb for rural homesteads, where I just know how to book and there's no sort of guilt, sort of money I have to pay in between. And so for me, that was the thing that just opened my mind to what if we could standardize? What if we could standardize the rural experience in the tourist areas at least, and benefit the communities? Because people talk about streambank cultivation, right? And you want to move people away from streambank cultivation, but are not introducing people to stuff like aquaponics, where again they could have actually taken that nutrient-rich water, put it through their plants and back into the rivers, for example, without having to use harmful fertilizers and all of that stuff. But it's a lot of these things that excite me about the possibilities. Like, why are we all using these Blair toilets and pit latrines and we're not harvesting biogas? Why aren't we harvesting rainwater? Why aren't we collecting all of this stuff? And for me, what I noticed in all of my travels, when I looked at some of the development officers and so on, is that people aren't willing to live in the communities, because it's one of those things that if you can't, if you don't believe in your own product, it certainly shows, because people come in and they go out. And for us, we were like, what if I could just move there and live there? If I changed my life and came up with solutions for my own life, then surely it will come up with solutions for those communities. And we started to look up smart cities, green cities, and it started to excite me a lot more when I found out that just through my village alone, the broadband cable is passing right through our village from the airport to Victoria Falls. That excited me, because I'm like, why are we're sitting on bandwidth here? Like, we could be sitting in a hut and watching Netflix every single day. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But watching YouTube videos, like I watched this community in Bangladesh, and they basically they are feeding themselves by posting videos on YouTube of them cooking food for themselves. So they cook these huge feasts.
Yeah. I've seen those.
Like
I've seen those.
25 million views. But do you know 1 million views can put a borehole? All you need is for people to just watch your video, and you can put a borehole. You can build.
I saw the one of the lady. I saw the one of the lady. The one she was showing us how she cooks an octopus. You know, and she had like millions of views, and I'm like, hey, we roast beavers. You know, we roast beaver. We gonna show you how we roast beaver.
Right.
How we catch, you know, or how we catch a rabbit. You know, but
and the thing that we criminalize a lot of local things. I'll just give just one last example of the one thing that really blew my mind and excited me a lot, was the fact that when I traveled to Mexico, they served us a drink from Brazil that's made after harvest and so on, right? They served us a drink, and then I looked at the label, and you know, and I asked, how do you say this word? And they said it's called cachaça. It's called cachaça, for crying out loud, Maimba. This is $100 million industry. $100 million industry of cocktails we've been drinking all this time from a drink made called cachaça. And yet in Zimbabwe, it's illegal to make cachaça. And yet on the trade route of people coming in from Mozambique, coming through the Munumtapa Kingdom, going out through Angola, going to the Americas, we gave the world a product that's making $100 million, and it's illegal in Zimbabwe. And my biggest challenge is that there's not enough lobbying here. And I'm not saying that we should produce you see, the thing is, the reason why cachaça here is dangerous is because it's illegal. So it's being made using harmful substances and so on. And yet after a harvest with maize, you can literally just boil that maize in water, and you can add yeast, ferment it, distill it, proof it at 40%, and Victoria Falls could have an official drink that you can take as shots and have it with baobab powder instead of taking tequila and salt. That's what excites me, Maimba. This is our thing, and we shouldn't be importing things.
Carl is advocating that cachaça. Shelly, Shelly, do you take cachaça?
No, I haven't tried it, but I'm eager to try it now that Carl's mentioned it.
Shelly, no, don't. That's peer pressure right there. You're succumbing to peer pressure right there. All right, Shelly, I know that you're part of We Are Victoria Falls initiative. What is that initiative about? I know we're gonna move. After this, we're gonna move away from Victoria Falls, all right? Because we really don't want to be racist, guys, on this platform where Victoria Falls is not tourism. You know, do you know that there are people now that think that Victoria Falls is tourism? You know, that it's all that we have in terms of tourism. So we really want to go across the length and breadth of Zimbabwe, go to the Eastern Highlands. How do we improve the Eastern Highlands? Mashingo. Do you know one time I asked on Facebook, and I say to people, mention one place that you've never been to. One place that you've never been to. Yeah, but just give a word. You would be amazed at ordinary people that you think that would have been to Great Zimbabwe. They're like, Great Zimbabwe. I've never been to Great Zimbabwe. I've never been to Matopa. I've never been to. So we really want to go touch. We're gonna touch on everything, but before we go there, Shelly, tell me about the We Are Victoria Falls initiative. What is that all about? As I quickly close my door, please go ahead. I'm just going to close my door.
Okay. So the We Are Victoria Falls initiative is actually part of a greater program, the Zimbabwe Destination Development Program, which is the Ministry of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry, supported by IFC. And what they are doing is working on a much larger program to assist in terms of the technical advice for Zimbabwe's planning and visioning for its tourism destinations, and looking at how they could, basically what we're discussing at the moment, but on a much bigger scale. And when COVID hit, they plugged in the We Are Victoria Falls initiative to the Zimbabwe Destination Development Program, which is essentially a crisis communications. So what I have been doing is coordinating all the efforts that have been going on by this incredible community. Carl can vouch for it. This community has been outstanding and quite hard hit. I think out of most, everyone across the world has been impacted by COVID. But if you look at Victoria Falls, this town, now city, as Carl mentioned earlier, 85% of the people here are employed in the tourism sector. And with COVID pandemic hitting, that it means that a large portion of the population in and around Victoria Falls has been severely impacted. And the work that has gone on in this community as a supportive function to the entire community has been incredible. And so what I've been doing is coordinating efforts to put the word out from a local perspective to the international market, to keep them updated of what has been happening in Victoria Falls from a preparedness and response to the COVID pandemic. And that will move forward, communicating as we go on in towards a recovery. That's We Are Victoria Falls in a nutshell.
Okay, so Shelly, now that you've set up We Are Victoria Falls and you're working with great communities, how do we take that to We Are Mutare, We Are Chimani Mani? How do you help communities in Chimani Mani? Feel free to come in, Carl, but how do we say We Are Mashingo, We Are Matopos? How do we replicate that same model so that we probably have the initiative in 5 places and kind of have some sort of a competition going on about people pushing their localities and putting that on the world map? Is there a way, if at all, that we can actually replicate and, have boards or teams in the different places? Or We Are Zarabani, for example?
Look, I certainly think it would be a positive thing, and it would definitely bring about greater destination awareness in terms of the different destinations within Zimbabwe. It kind of needs someone who can coordinate the efforts, who's based in that location, and who is a good communicator, and that's as simple as that. I mean, we've built the website.
Maybe this is something that you would have to be done at ministry level or ZAA or something, where there's a desk that then coordinates that. Carl is shaking his head. Carl is shaking his head.
Well,
Sorry.
This program.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head profusely because I believe in something called biomimicry, which is how, we look at nature for clues on how, this is how things are invented, like planes and so on. We look at nature. And one of the things, one of the successes that will happen in tourism is if the population of Zimbabwe knows what to do. Now, when you look at communities like Victoria Falls, and Sherry said it quite rightly, the model, if we're able to synthesize and create 10 Shelly Coxes around the country, it would be fantastic. But since we can't do that, what we can do, though, is the work that she's already doing, which is absolutely fantastic, is exactly that, the model of looking at community. And in Victoria Falls, a lot of people know what needs to be done in a lot of cases. So you'll be shocked when you see how Victoria Falls gets together. Like, I remember the one time in a WhatsApp group, there was a hold-up at the border. And, there was a WhatsApp group, like a business community WhatsApp group, that just got together and they started making calls to the extent of getting the ministry in and whatever it is. And before we knew it, there was a container that was already there, and they were already now processing, there was better capacity at the border bringing people in. Now, the issue in Zimbabwe is that when we wait for the top to come with solutions down to us, this is when we lose the plot, because this is why you end up with ZAA being stretched. ZAA's core business should not be destination marketing. That's not their core business. They're a regulator. They're there to be there to see that everyone is being compliant, standards, making sure that we've got like a standards manual and all of these things, as opposed to now they're having to actually create videos, be the content creators and so on. We need things to start at a grassroots level coming up. We need people in their homes to actually start knowing what it is, what is the code of conduct of hosting guests and that kind of thing, appreciating what you have. Filmmakers need to be filming on location in certain sets. What we need right now is to drive a community-driven approach from the bottom up. While the decision makers make decisions from the top down, that's okay. But we need to start lobbying things from the bottom up and actually coming up with more initiatives that are homegrown, rather than waiting for an office to say. This is why we end up with a one brush sort of issue of saying, oh, let's do what we've seen in Vic Falls in Nyanga, or let's do it in Chimanimani. Case in point, there was the dancing security guard at one of the hotels. And I remember I used to do a lot of marketing, advertising campaigns for African Sun. And they had this one great asset of this security guard who was, doing his thing. And then they thought the best thing to do is to do it at all the hotels. Now, it's all well and good, but hotels have different strengths. Chartbeck has that fire that they say has never been put out. Victoria Falls Hotel has the doorman with the badges. There's so many different assets and things that are specific, say, to hotels that I feel we're missing out on that potential. We shouldn't be having things like, our chefs right now don't cook at home. You can see that in our restaurants. That's why most of our restaurants get consultants from South Africa, because we're not getting chefs that are passionate about food to go and take Gogo's recipe and introduce it to the hotel and have mkana and all of these things, because it's not happening from a community level. And we need to stop the top down and start thinking of initiatives that are going to bring the bottom up.
You've spoken about communities. There's something interesting that I want to say. I'm going to come to you, Shelly. A few years ago, I think about 3-4 years ago, I was asked to MC the National Environment Awards, quiz for primary school, right? For primary schools, the whole of Zimbabwe. So I traveled, I went to Kadoma, and I was emceeing this quiz. And the one thing that I noticed, though, was one, the questions, of course, was all conservation, great questions. But the one thing that I noticed that most of the schools that were there were private schools, right? And of these private schools, which mostly had white kids, they knew their conservation. They were talking about trees, they were talking about stuff that I was like, what? What is this? These words from the encyclopedia, and they're talking about ants, they're talking about names of ants, and they knew their stuff. But the one thing that broke me was, one, it's the private schools that are getting this education, and the kids in government schools, in rural schools, I know they've got a science subject or some geography or something, but I don't think that they tackle conservation to the level that these private schools are tackling conservation. So how, as you are a conservationist and you're passionate about that, would you, if government was listening, if somebody was listening out there, how do we take conservation? I mean, and again, now I need you to come in from an Ekaya perspective, from a rural schools perspective. How do we teach? I mean, it's always been there, but how do we still deliberately teach our grade 1s and our grade 2s that these trees are your future? The animals, the domestic animals, the wild animals. If you see poachers, don't burn. How do we take this to a point of passion within the government schools or within the rural setup?
Well, I think, that's what one of the things I was explaining is with Gonorizo down in the bottom section of Zimbabwe in the south, is because they have had such big buy-in from the communities. The communities, majority of the people surrounding Gonorizo have been employed in the actual park's efforts. Their families are being taught at that level. They're seeing their fathers work in conservation. They're seeing their mothers work in tourism facilities. That kind of all stems down so that it's doing the top and bottom levels. So there's the earning capacity for their parents, but there's also the educational facility coming up. And the challenges, so one of the things I want to give you a great example is a few years ago, I actually wrote an article on the community efforts that were being done by tourism operators in and around Wangi. And I went around to the different camps and to the communities and surrounding areas to go and see what was happening. And there's an organization called Mvelo Safari Lodges, Mark Butcher. So he's been working on the boundary of Wangi National Park in the Ngoma area closer to Chilocho. And he has been working with the schools there. And I was amazed. One night we went to the school. There was a teacher who was very passionate about conservation herself. And she was doing extra lessons by solar lights because the school doesn't have power. She was using solar lights to educate the children about conservation at nighttime. And I think the challenge isn't necessarily just what is in our educational handbooks. It is the teachers have to have the same sort of passion. You learn from others around you. But like Carl said, we also need to go back a step. I really loved what Carl said earlier about going backwards. To me, there seems to be this misconception that development is all about big buildings and growing out and growing bigger. And I think development sometimes is about going back to your roots and developing like naturally as opposed to going like that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the traditional, I don't know, I wanted to ask the question to Carl, is how much of that, I asked someone the question about the totems a while back, and they said to me that it still does happen, but how much of that traditional education that came in the old days. How much is that still going on in communities these days? I mean, how much do people take on the role of their totems? Is there still that same respect that there used to be? Because there was so much around, from my understanding, there was so much around the rural communities that was taught from young ages and not necessarily just in schools. And when they went to school, then it was enhanced. Is that still happening at the community level? I don't know. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Mute.
Sorry. We really just have to look at what we call influencers nowadays, right? A lot has been lost and a lot has gone. Like, you know, there's a when you're insulting a person, you insult them by saying you have a strong rural background. So already the principle of rural is seen as being backward, is seen as being non-developed, and this is a big problem. We seem to love our digital television and our apps and all of these things, and we're forgetting the rest of the world has actually taken a shift back to a rural Zimbabwean lifestyle, and all of this knowledge is gone. At age 14, your father would take you to teach you how to build a house, and you built your own house, and you'd build your own kraal, and you'd put in a cow. And the way your totem was used is that if you helped your mother do something, your mother at night will call you by your totem, and she'll sing praises to you, and even give you a cow. And you keep building up your kraal until you're ready to marry. Now you've got cows to pay lobola. Now all of these things don't exist anymore, and they've been eroded little by little. And we haven't paid attention to this, but we have called it development. We've said, no, build your houses using bricks because that's the new modern way of doing things. We haven't inspired our architects to say, go to the rural areas and insist that your project work must include a rural solution for housing. And like the house that we've built is based on a Tonga hut. It's using a Ndebele design. It's taking into consideration tree houses and being built in such a way that it would work in a rural setting without having to cut down trees. Now, we're kickstarting this process by trying to inspire this shift in thinking of being able to reteach people. And this is what we need to do, because that knowledge, surely it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And most people don't even, what happened when people were resettled, they were put into communities on land that, they came from an arable place, and then they were put in a place with animals. The community that was living with animals was put somewhere where they couldn't grow any food. And so you've got this mismatch of people that have just been this disjointed moving around and shuffling of people. I mean, think about it. Even in our government, we have a ministry of resettlement, not settlement, but resettlement. That just shows you that historically we've had a history of moving people around. And when you move people, you move and change cultures. You move and change identity. You move and change things to such an extent that Zimbabweans actually believe that their staple diet is sadza from maize meal, and yet maize meal was introduced to our country from South America. So that's not even Zimbabwe. So I will have arguments with people who will say, well, you can't cook sadza like that. And I'm like, but that's not even a dish of yours. Most of your dishes you don't even eat anymore. Maheu was introduced from Zambia. Can you imagine? We buy Maheu from Zambia before we started creating our own, because we looked down upon our own things. And this is a problem when you're now starting to talk about conservation and the environment, is that how do you speak to people who already have a broken knowledge system? How do you start communicating when if you go to most rural schools, you will see, those ABC sort of, like A is for apple, B is for bee and whatever. And you've got nothing that's localized. You're teaching people about animals that, like a deer, like you've got like a reindeer, and they've got elephants, they've got lions, they've got all sorts of animals that they could be taught on. I remember even talking to some school kids and telling them, do you know how much a guide makes? And yet all of them wanted to be like accountants and so on. By the time I left, most of them wanted to work in tourism. It's this passing down of knowledge that we need as a culture, to keep telling our kids, to teach our kids that, no, it's not cool to speak perfect English, actually. It's much cooler to speak in your own language and teach someone from another country, because, by the way, you get paid more money as a translator. These are the things that we need to be teaching people to say the things you're throwing away have a lot of value. And so we've taken a capitalist approach to it by saying, here's the money you're throwing away. Forget about what's right or wrong about it. But you see that tree that you're about to cut down? You could have made a lot more money from that tree. If you had built a house around it, you probably would have charged 80 to 120 US dollars a night for that tree house. So a person is more motivated to build a tree house than they are cutting down that tree, for example.
Wow, great conversations here. And our viewers, I see comments there. So what we're gonna do, guys, is we're gonna just go for a commercial break. Just to thank our sponsors, Tatenda. Please take us through the commercial break, and when we get back, we'll go through the last segment of our conversation, guys. But I'm really loving this conversation, and very rich and informative. And we'll need to just find a way of replicating it from Victoria Falls to the rest of Zimbabwe. And we'll just go for a commercial break. Okay. Carl is taking down his cachaça. Cachaça.
Quit.
All right, guys, we're in the last 10 or so minutes of our conversation, a great conversation here that we're having for this hour. Again, I want us to move away from Victoria Falls, and go to the rest of Zimbabwe. Let's go to Chimanimani, the beautiful eastern highlands of Zimbabwe, right? Let's go to the Zimbabwe ruins in Masvingo. There are certain places. There are places. I mean, I went to school in Marondera. We used to have a place called Tsindi ruins. There are these little places that, again, we never get to talk about, but they have got such historical stories around them. Somebody was telling me about Bushman caves in Mavuradona, and all these other places. So we are Victoria Falls. Carl, you've got your Ekaya project. If somebody was to listen to us, guys, how do we take all these initiatives? Again, now because of the pandemic, every business is looking inwards than outwards, and unfortunately, we don't know when this pandemic. I mean, 2021. This pandemic could hit us a number. It could hit us on the other side, in Shona they say it could just literally just hit us on the other side. I mean, we could go to 2021 December with this pandemic. What will this mean for business, for tourism in Zimbabwe? So if we're moving away from Vic Falls, guys, what places in Zimbabwe would you say, oh man, if you two were to move to Chimanimani, what place would you say, if I was in Chimanimani or if I was in Masvingo, because of ABC, this is what I would push for? Shelley, I'll start with you. I'll come to you, Carl.
Are you asking me specifically about Chimanimani or where I would move to?
No, not Chimanimani. I'm saying if we were to transplant you from Vic Falls and you were to look at the whole of Zimbabwe, and you're gonna take, we are Victoria Falls, and where would you go and what would you do? What places would you say those guys could just take that and that and that, and yeah?
Well, look, I think a destination that is definitely coming up in the ranks from local visitors' perspective, but also with more knowledge being put out, more knowledge and awareness being put out to the wider regional and international markets, is definitely the Eastern Highlands. And I think what makes the Eastern Highlands so unique is that it is completely different to anywhere else in our country. It is almost like a tropical climate there, and the vegetation is like tropical climate. The bird life is absolutely astounding. And just the landscape is so different to anywhere else in Zimbabwe. There's quite a few people who have invested in the Eastern Highlands over the last couple of years. You've got a couple of lodges that have been refurbished, Aberfoyle Lodge. You've got that beautiful Skywalk, and there's a new lodge that has just opened up this year. I think it's called Skywalk Lodge. And I think that area and that region of our country is fast making their own awareness, but obviously could do with an extra push by collaborative efforts. And I know that ZTA have also been fairly good in pushing the Eastern Highlands marketing through their channels. But if I was to move anywhere at this stage, it would be down to the Eastern Highlands, and it's close enough to Gonarezhou to still have that, because Gonarezhou is probably one of my favorite places. I am lucky because my actual favorite place in Zimbabwe is Wangi National Park, but that is because I've grown up visiting that national park almost every year of my life, and it's a very special place to me. But Gonarezhou is very, very much up there as my second. And the beauty is Gonarezhou and Eastern Highlands are so close together to be able to enjoy both, and they are completely different. Eastern Highlands, like I said, has that beautiful open valleys and then beautiful like tropical forests, beautiful waterfalls. It is incredible landscape. And then you've got Gonarezhou with the Chilocho Cliffs, which is completely mind-blowing. Those sandstone cliffs and those open floodplains and rivers. It's just beautiful. So I think definitely down the south and east of the country is where I would relocate if I had to. And the reason why is because the diverse landscapes down there, the immense amount of bird life and wildlife is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was in the Eastern Highlands about 3 weeks ago, and at the place I was staying at Forest Hills, a beautiful, beautiful place. And I was asking the guy about, I had gone there with a team that had taken there, and I was asking them about, these guys would like to go to a waterfall to have pictures taken. And he was going on about, no, there's this waterfalls that I'd never heard of. I mean, they're small waterfalls, granted, but they're absolutely beautiful. They are small, but there are a lot of waterfalls that people don't actually know about, and that they're actually there, in the Eastern Islands. Carl and the viewer Davison Charamba says Eastern Islands is the way to go. Is the way to.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Carl, where would you go?
I would, the townships. I'm a township boy. The townships in Zimbabwe are literally like a gem. To be honest, like I just imagine like a company like Nash Paints painting up like one road of like houses and stuff like that. Starts being served from people's homes, going down to. Have you ever gone and watched a local township football match in one of those like dusty football grounds like in Mavuku or in Pumula, and just like watch a game, dry meat and bet on which team, and just have a money game where you can even just jump in like in the 80th minute and score like the winning goal, then pop down to the bar and then like share some chibuku or whatever it is, and then spend the rest of the evening in a shabin, like drinking and like listening to like the sounds of the township. All of these things that I mentioned are illegal in Zimbabwe. They're illegal. You can't do these things, but they're so exciting. I wish we could do them. I wish they were there. I wish we could do, because my grandmother Mahlongwane Mpula, she used to run a shabin, and she used to put ice cream in her ingwebu and serve it. Like that house was very popular. I'm telling you, like people would come and eat sadza and whatever. So township tourism was definitely my thing, and I just wish we could like awaken this sleeping giant. It's just insane. Chinotimba alone in Victoria Falls, people don't know, has one of the most outstanding views
of the falls or the river right now. It's like an unseen thing. If someone just built like a viewing deck just on the edge of Chinotimba, I mean, we're sitting on money here, guys. I just wish the townships would just come up, and that's the place I'd want to go.
You know what, Carl, it's interesting that you actually spoke about township tourism, because I was going to ask that question next, even as we close, that you know how if you go to South Africa, they've managed to monetize. If you go to Cape Town, they've monetized just the townships, the city itself, the town itself. I mean, you go to those multicolored streets, you know, where you spoke about Nash paints, multicolored streets of orange, purple, and so your house is painted and people come and get pictures outside your door. You know what I mean? And so again, and in Zimbabwe, I mean, we've got historical places. Don't believe that there's absolutely nothing there's no way you can take someone to Mbare. You know, what place in Mbare? How do we monetize? And the local, and not just the company that goes into Mbare, like Shelly, you're talking about. It's about the locals in Mbare monetizing their own neighborhood, you know, and making, because if you monetize it and you've got that concept, like you guys were talking about Vic Falls, everybody comes together. Imagine if residents in Mbare were to come together with the same, that look, if we come together, we take care of our spaces, tourists can come and walk through Mbare, and that brings revenue and gives us jobs. We're able to sell t-shirts, we're able to sell bangles, we're able to sell sculptures, because we've kept our community. You know what I mean? Mbare. Yes, Shelly.
Mayimba, I wanted to add to what you're saying is there's actually a great example of this just outside Matopus, the communities around Matopus National Park. It's called My Beautiful Home. And, you know, traditionally in the African culture, your homestead is your pride and joy. And there's a lot of pride that goes into the building of your homestead, the traditional painting of it with the dyes. And what they've done is they've embraced that in the homesteads around Matopus. And they run an annual competition, which is in collaboration with the tourism operators. Where the person who wins that year, I'm not sure what exactly the prizes are, but every year they run a My Beautiful Home. And what it's done is it's inspired that whole community to focus inward on maintaining their homesteads, taking pride like traditionally they would have. So I think it's a great concept, what you're saying, in terms of people in Mbare could be doing the same thing. It's taking pride of your own environment and plowing into your own environment to be able to generate revenue from that.
In Carl, in Bulawayo, what places would really be like Mbare or Highfields? What kind of what?
Yeah, for me, I'm
biased towards Pumula because that's where I grew up. I just think like old Pumula is just one of those. My uncle used to cut hair by the barber shop. My grandmother was, you know, running her place. She had 27 grandkids.
Something wrong with your connection, Carl.
The houses that... Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think Pumula, but obviously you know things like, if you look at like where Barberfields, I can't remember where's Barberfields situated. Which township in Bulawayo is Barberfields situated? It's at the top of my head and I'm forgetting. But if you look at the impact of having something like Highlanders in your own community, and those are the kind of things that sort of build up, that local pride that makes people, Mbare having Dynamos. And it's not by mistake that the two biggest clubs in the country are based in two of the oldest sort of neighborhoods in the country. And that model works because that's where people go to pride. That's where people go to enjoy themselves.
And I like that you've brought in the biggest sports teams, Dynamos in Mbare and Islanders in Bulawayo at Barberfields. Imagine if we were to create economies around that. I mean, if you go to England, you go to Spain, what are you going to do if you're a Liverpool supporter? you're gonna go to Mecca, you're gonna go to Liverpool, you're gonna go to Enfield. You have to go to Enfield, and you're gonna pay £50. The last time I was there, I had to pay just to be taken around the soccer field. You know what I mean? So imagine if we created economies around bubble fields, memorabilia, and people actually coming to learn about how Highlanders was formed, who formed it, what had happened. These workers came around, and all that rich heritage. We've got it nowhere. There's no museum around those spaces, which should then be your sports tourism, as it were. These are very, very, for me, it breaks my heart again, where people think that nothing comes from the ghetto and you can't make money in the ghetto, when South Africa has managed to monetize the ghetto. I mean, what clean place can you go to Mbare to go and eat? Or in Blawayo, where can you go and eat? I mean, look at Harare. I mean, if you don't go to Gala or you go to Kapoto, why can't we have a place like Gala in Mbare?
I think the issue has to do with lobbying. And so one of the things that we are doing with Ikaya is that for a person to make a rural homestead a tourism product, there's a lot of compliance issues that they have to put in place. So rather than have them do it and put the burden on them, what we're doing is we're joining them collectively and sourcing the resources to be able to register them properly, for them to do all of the things that will take them out of being criminalized, for us to be able to engage with the government and lobby for, listen, we want a microbrewery in this particular community because we've calculated that it's going to make this amount of money. If you do it in such a way where there's tastings and so on, because the problem, for example, coming back to Kachasu, is that we're just looking at it from a outside perspective of moonshine. But at the same time, the cane spirits that are made by some of our big distillers are basically a version of Kachasu that has been watered down to 40%. It's just sold with a different name. It's just given a name and called a cane spirit. So whereas I know, whereas I feel the misconception we have about the name Kachasu, but its history is so strong that a foreigner is not going to have the same reaction as us to that drink. And I'll prove it even further, because Malawi's gin, for example, is in the airlines. What Zimbabwean drink is in our airlines? And this is where the problem is that we're consuming so much from outside because we think outside is better. But we're forgetting the number of products that we have internally that we could export to the rest of the world. I think it's looking back at those things, the Mahewus, the Kachasus, the Baobab, the Rapokos, all of those things, and be able to look at them from a commercial perspective and say, listen, here's what the branding looks like. If you go and Google my name right now and put the word Kachasu on Facebook, go and look at the packaging design, and you tell me whether or not that product should be on a shelf and sold in a duty-free shop, earning money for this country.
Shelly, you and I think after this, I'm going to be looking for Kachasu, man. I mean, the way that Carl is selling Kachasu,
I'm lobbying hard. I'm lobbying. I'll be on the steps of Parliament trying to get the votes.
Shelly, you're on mute, I think. You're on mute, Shelly.
I was actually hold of Carl later to tell him that he owes me a bottle of Kachasu.
Yes.
I don't think so, because once you do that, that 4-month-old, what's your daughter's name, Shelly?
Kala Makwa. She's actually named after the Kala lilies, and then Makwa Pan and Wangi National Park.
Oh, nice. So I don't. If you drink Kachasu, you won't be able to breastfeed. I mean, we won't. You totally zone out for like 2 days. So Shelly, in closing, we're gonna close now. What are your closing words tonight?
I think for me, one of the things that I would say is, we really need to get a localized appreciation for the economic value of our protected areas in this country. That requires going deeper into the educational side of things, but also looking at the empowerment of the custodians of the land, which are ultimately the people of Zimbabwe. You know, the growth of tourism presents opportunities to secure funding for livelihoods and for conservation, but the growth opportunities also rely on the integrity of our ecosystems and maintaining those. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of things that we need to start looking at in terms of how we can have a greater awareness amongst our local population of this beautiful heritage that we have here and why it's so important to protect it, but also looking at solutions like Carl is doing on the Kaya program of how communities can actually benefit from what we have here as our landscape, and why through benefiting from it, they will probably look at protecting it further.
Thank you, Shelley. And Carl, your closing words?
You know, I just want Zimbabweans to start thinking about investing back in rural. You know, instead of waiting to get those stands in the cities that you're waiting for, just take a trip to the rural areas. Get yourself a tent, put a blow-up mattress, put a duvet, pillows, take a solar lamp, take your phone, take your iPad. Just go to the rural areas. Go mark a circle that's 5 meters in diameter, and just draw a circle there, and just understand that there's an app coming where you'll be able to register your rural home and earn money for people to stay in your rural home. You'll get the support to teach you exactly how you're going to add on things like, you know, like upsell, like your food, bring festivals to your communities. Go and do that. Go and learn how a cow is slaughtered. Put money together to slaughter a cow and you know, cook it over an open fire, 3-legged pot. You know, have a feast. Get people in the community to come with the veggies and whatever. Just make this an annual thing. Make this an annual festival. Let's make this our version of Thanksgiving. For us as Zimbabweans, we have the power. We can't be waiting for the government to tell us what to do for tourism. We are the tourism. The reason why, if you look at ZAA came up with the World of Wonders, and they came up with 7 wonders of Zimbabwe. And the number one thing is the people. And if the people are not involved in the tourism, then we have got no hope in hell of making sure that tourism makes money from a domestic tourism standpoint. And listen, the way that the world is going, we can't wait for the foreigners to come back into the country either. Everything is going to change. So just go to your rural areas, invest in your rural areas. That's all I need you to do. It's not going to cost you much.
Thank you very much, there. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Carl. It's really been fun engaging with you two people. I follow both of you. I'm inspired by both of you. Shelley, this is the first time we've really interfaced with Shelley, but I had actually forgotten your daughter's name because I follow your work. I followed you throughout the pregnancy, you know, we're with you, you know, rooting for you, you know. Ultimately, as Zimbabwe Achievers Awards, I think it's every story we tell is about being Zimbabwean. It's not about, I keep saying this, it's not about political parties, it's not about Ndebele or Shona, it's not about rich, poor. It's about the one thing that's the umbilical cord that brings us together, which is that we are Zimbabweans. It's not black, it's not white, it's not about anything. It's about the ability to take care of today or tomorrow, you know? So this is what brings us, all of us together. And like what you're saying, Carl, and what you're doing, Shelley, we can't wait for government, you know? We can't wait for somebody to come and change or take care of our spaces. I keep saying, if you can't sweep your own yard,
yeah,
you know, you can't sweep your own yard. I mean, traditionally, if you wake up at 5 in the morning, unfortunately, it was the women that did it, but the men would have to go and, you know, go into the fields. The first thing that a woman would do was to sweep the yard. You know, so all that is
and part of the road, and part of the road,
you know, our cultural set up was taking care of our space. But now you have people that litter in the street that you live in. People don't even, you don't even, mow your own lawn. You don't even bemba your own lawn, So government can't come to our yards to bemba that lawn for us. So the mindset really has to change. We've got to be able to be a people that firstly take care of ourselves, and then take care of our neighborhoods. If we can't come together in the street with potholes and fill up the potholes on our own and be whining and moaning about government, it's not going to take us anywhere. I'm going to bring Tatenda, who is ZAA country manager. Tatenda, over to you. Thank you very much, Tatenda.
Thanks, Mayimba, for being such a great moderator. It's been a fantastic chat. And Carl, great to see you on the other side of the computer, considering I haven't seen you and we live in the same place.
I know, right? I know. We're literally next to each other, not on the screens.
Hi, guys. I'm sorry I wasn't here to welcome you into the discussion.
Hi, Tatenda.
But I've been following, and yeah, it's been an amazing discussion you've been having here. I think if I'm to reflect on the summit as a whole, so far, let's just say about 10,000 Zimbabweans tuned in over this past 2 days of the summit. And what I can take from that and from the conversations that we've been having is people are interested. Zimbabweans are interested in what's going on at home. They are interested in Zimbabwe. And it's good for us to keep having these conversations. It's a start. We gotta have conversations. All that Carl, I mean, I know some of us are not with Kachasu, but we'll get onto it at one point soon enough. But I mean, all these conversations need to be started. They need to be started, and that's how it grows. That's how we grow as a nation. We need to keep talking. And so thank you very much for being a conversation starter. Shelley, you're doing amazing work. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I mean, you and your family and your team, everything is just, it's good to see people so tuned in to what they're doing, and so passionate. Mayimba, you have been amazing. Thank you. The past 2 days, crazy, but thank you very much. You have been awesome. I'm going to just kind of go ahead and officially close off the ZAA Global Virtual Summit for 2020, the first ever. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in and stuck with us through the bad network, audio issues, and so forth. Thank you so much for staying tuned. I hope we've gotten some very, very good lessons. We've made good connections. I think for Carl and Shelley, in case people want to get in touch, if we've got questions, maybe you could leave a link or your contacts in the comments. And this is going to go up anyway on ZAA Facebook page. It's going to be on Zimbo Live page. So, in case people want to continue the conversation, they can at least reach you over there.
Cool.
A big shout out to Amit. Thank you so much for making this possible. Thank you to Town and Country. You guys have created or helped us as ZAA create this amazing platform for everyone to come through. Right. Yes, I wish we had a glass of Kachasu to kind of toast to the end of the summit, yes. But we don't. So we will just we'll just kind of we'll do it. We'll link up soon enough when the situation permits. And looking forward to more great conversations. It doesn't have to stop here. Really, let's keep talking. Let's keep building, and it's to where we're gonna go as a country. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Mayimba. Thanks to everyone for watching and staying tuned in. Have a great night.
Guys.
Thanks, guys.
You too. Thanks, Abe. Bye.
Bye.